Hello there, welcome back for another Brutus Monroe video. This is Cassie, and I'm going to be making a masculine card for you today using this brand new stencil of the month. And I just think that stencil is absolutely gorgeous. I'm going to be combining a couple of other stamp sets. This first one is the Botanical Banners, and I'm just going to be using the Happy Birthday from that, even though this set is gorgeous. And then we're also going to be using the Special Delivery stamp set, which is the set that made me fall in love with Brutus Monroe from the very beginning. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with what we're making. I have a piece of Bristol smooth cardstock cut down, and just about any cardstock would probably work. But I'm going to take the stencil, I'm going to use the Pixie Spray, I'm going to head outside, spray that up really good, bring it back in, and then we're going to tack that down to the front of our piece of Bristol smooth. My plan is to do some embossing through the stencil. So I'm just pouncing a mini ink blending tool. I have a sponge just dedicated to embossing ink, and I keep it with my embossing pad. And then I'm just pouncing that. I'm not going to like swirl it. I'm just pouncing it through the stencil. I'll pull the stencil away. And then I am going to cover that with some Gilded embossing powder. It'll make sense here in a second. And it did a really good job of not sticking to where the Pixie Spray had been. And I think that's because I waited for the Pixie Spray to dry pretty thoroughly on the back before I stuck it down to my piece of paper. So now I'm just going to heat set that until that is smooth and melted, and you'll be able to tell because it'll go from a matte finish to a glossy. And I love their embossing powders because they're just a beautiful array of different colors, but this gold in particular is an ultra fine, and it's definitely one of my favorites. So I'll just keep melting that entire background. And then when I'm done with that and it's cooled down a little bit, I'm going to grab out my Distress OXIDE in the color ground Espresso, and I'm going to ink that up all over my background. And this is basically a Emboss Resist, what I'm doing here, because I want that the ink to soak in between where the stencil was, so it'll look like wood. There's the point, right? And then I'm going to just take a microfiber cloth and buff away all the excess ink that had been over on the embossing powder. So that's why it's called Emboss Resist. And I love how that turned out. So I'm going to trim down my panel just to be about 5.5 inches, so it will go from top to bottom of an A2 size card. And then we're going to move on to the rest of our elements, which would be some stamping at this point. I have more Bristol Smooth. Now this is the Strathmore Bristol Smooth cardstock that I am using. And I'm going to put in a couple of the images from that Special Delivery stamp set. I'm going to ink that up with my Raven Detail ink. And this ink is fantastic for if you want to do watercoloring because it's water resistant. And it's also fantastic for alcohol marker coloring. But today I'm going to be doing some watercoloring with my ARTEZA Real Brush markers. I'll clean off my stamp with some of my Squeaky Clean. Love that stuff. It's awesome for cleaning all types of stuff in my craft room. I even used it on my scissors today, and it did a fantastic job of getting all the gunk off. Okay, so now we're going to move on to doing our coloring. And I'm using, as I said, my ARTEZA Real Brush markers. And what I like to do typically is put down my darkest color. This is very different than how I color with my alcohol markers. I like to put down my darkest color with these Real Brush markers. And then I will sometimes drag it out with the water brush, as you'll see that I did there on the brown at the bottom and on the red part of the flag. And then I actually don't do it at all with the light gray that I'm using here. I just use the marker itself and then leave it at that. I'm going to put a little bit on the envelope themselves, and then I'll bring in some more of that red. And then I'll drag that around with the water brush. And then once I'm happy with that, just to add a little bit of color, that's really why I brought the red in. Then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to bring in the blue on the mailbox. So I have a little bit of blue on the stamp or the envelope. And then I started off here with my lighter blue, and I was like, wait, what are you doing? So I grabbed my darker blue, and this is where I put in all of my shadowing first, which is, like I said, very different than how I would color with my alcohol markers. And then I'm going to come in after I've gotten all my darkest shadows put in. I'm going to bring in that light blue, and it's going to drag some of that color out, which is one of the reasons I love these ARTEZA Real Brush markers, is you can kind of watercolor just with the markers themselves. And then when I'm happy with how I've drug that out, I'll bring in the water brush, and then I'll paint the rest of it. So I'm just dragging that color and then bringing it all the way to the end so that it's light all the way at that, where I would have the lightest color. And it's just that easy. And then once that's dry, I'm going to start fussy cutting. And how I fussy cut is I tend to keep my scissors just where they are, and then I tend to just move the paper around. These are super simple images to fussy cut around, so it wasn't any big deal, and it didn't take any time whatsoever to do that. And as I have said many times before, I really don't mind fussy cutting at all. It's one of those things that I find kind of relaxing, just like coloring to me. And so then I'll fussy cut out the envelope too. I'm going to take the scrap of that Bristol smooth paper, it wouldn't matter what kind you use, and I'm going to grab the sentiment, one of the sentiments from this stamp set, special delivery. I only want part of that, so I'm taking a post-it note and I'm going to trim that down and just cover up the area I don't want stamped or inked. And then I'm going to ink that up with my detail Raven ink, or Raven Detail ink. So it's just going to say just a little note to say, and it doesn't have the rest of the sentiment. And it fit perfectly on the top part of that scrap of paper that I had. And then I'll take that out and I'm going to trim that down in my Tim Holtz Guillotine trimmer. Love this trimmer. And then I'll set that off to the side and I'll move on to the next sentiment. And that sentiment once again comes from the Botanical Banners. I'm just using the happy birthday from that. And I'm going to ink this up a few times. It is clear to me that because I use that detail ink so much, I'm going to have to re-ink it here very soon. So I've inked this up 3 times. And then when I'm happy with that, I'm going to fussy cut that out as well. And once again, that takes no time at all. I like to do the insides of my cards these days, so I have some lunch bag cardstock cut down to 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches, and I scored that at 4.25 inches, so this will be a side folding A2 size card. And I'm stamping the special delivery down a couple times. I grabbed one of the other mail boxes inside the set, and I'll ink that up, and I'll stamp that on the other side of the inside. And now we'll get ready to start adhering all of our pieces. I'm going to use some liquid glue on my stenciled piece, put that all over the back, and then line that up mostly to the far right of the card, just leaving a small border on that right side. And then once that is down and fairly dry, I'm going to go ahead and stick that inside of my guillotine trimmer and trim off the excess that was hanging off. I'd rather have it a little too long than a little too short, that's for sure. And so then we are going to put the little envelopes inside of our card as well. And then we're going to cover the backs of the rest of the pieces with some foam tape, and then we'll start adhering those to the front of the card. And I know it looks like I'm doing this kind of funky, but I wanted to make sure that the bottom part of the mailbox was covered by the sentiment. So we have just a little note to say. And then we'll peel off the backing paper of our other banner and we'll stick that down as well. And then that says happy birthday. And then I didn't add anything else. I thought this turned out to be a really nice masculine card. So there you have it, folks. We used a stencil and did some Emboss Resist. We did some watercolor, and I would love to know what you think of it down in the comments section down below. So if you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And I will see you very soon in the next video. Bye, everybody.